let's dive into the content for this afternoon's masterclass, where we are going to be talking about, let me just wait till it rolls up. Boom. How to grab eyes and stop people scrolling on social media. It really is a game. Like one thing I'll say very early on is a statistic I heard from Hootsuite at an in-person event not that long ago, which blew my mind, is that the average Australian scrolls through 70 meters of Facebook a day, which is just, you know, no wonder people are going to start getting RSI in their thumbs in the not too distant future. I don't know what the stats are for Instagram and TikTok, but I dare say it would be just as massive. So 70 meters. And so that's what we want to talk about today, is how to grab eyes. When people are scrolling through that, how do we grab their eyes and get them to stop and pay attention? How are we going to do that with imagery? Wendy must not be average. That's all good. I would probably say I bring up the average for a lot of people on this call. That's okay. I spend an inordinate amount of time on social media platforms in general. I will introduce myself very, very quickly. My name's Gareth. If you're returning to the masterclasses that we run, welcome back. Great to see you. And if it's your first time, great to have you here. I'm a social media trainer and strategist and all-round social media nerd. And I'm also the social media lead at the Starlight Children's Foundation and a co-author of the Diploma of Social Media Marketing. If that's the way that you've come through to us through the diploma, well then I really hope that you're thoroughly enjoying all the amazing content in there. Good day, Sophie, welcome. Brilliant. Well, a bit of a snapshot as to what we're going to be going through in today's session. As mentioned, it's important to understand that, you know, scroll stopping means more than just great images. We need to think first and foremost about how that sort of plays into our strategy. But then we're going to be talking about how to source and create great images in line with that. We will also talk about some editing. We'll talk about some image editing tools and apps that can really help you along the way. A couple of tips and tricks as to how to make sure that from camera or phone, if you're using that, from camera to publishing, some of those steps to take to make sure that your images really do pop out in the newsfeed. As I mentioned, as we go through today, feel free to throw any questions that you have at me into the chat box, and I will endeavour to answer those at different stages throughout the session. But if I don't get back to you, please feel free. I'll talk about this. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you have a specific question about today's content. So let's jump in and first start talking about strategy. Well, one thing that's really important is to understand where content marketing fits in the grand scheme of things. So we want to make sure that anything we're doing in social media marketing and when it comes to content is in line with our organization. So we want to make sure that we align that. So understanding what our organization is trying to achieve. Then obviously working out what, depending on where we fit in the in our current organization, whether we're sole traders or whether we are someone who works as part of a larger organization, how that organizational objectives sort of filter through to marketing goals and objectives. Then of course, that's when we set our things like our social media KPIs, but we also then want to make sure how content is going to play a part in that. One of the biggest challenges with social media marketing, and I think this is possibly why my brother is a risk assessor, so you can tell who got the personality. No, that's me. But he often, you know, he looks at social media, he looks at social media marketing, goes, Gareth, what are you just sharing images of cats? And early doors on social media marketing, there was a lot of that. A lot of organizations that were just putting out content just to get engaged. And what we want to make sure we do is align our content and our objectives with the organization, so we're actually getting some value out of it. Yes, it's great to have people engaging with our content on social, but we want to make sure that the outcomes are aligned with our organization. To that point as well, one of the first things we really need to do when we're going to be building our eye-grabbing content is understanding a brand identity canvas. So what this will allow us to do, and you'll hear me use this term an awful lot today, is build consistency in the content and imagery that we use. So as you can see here, there's an example of a canvas example of Services Australia. As you can see, we've got things, this will help guide a lot of what we do on social, not just from the imagery point of view, but also video and even the copy that we associate with it. But what this will allow us to do is understand things like icons and infographics, some of the visual components we're going to be utilizing. What are the colors? One thing that we want to do is not just obviously get a little bit of a spike in engagement, but we want to make sure that our messages are consistently visible, but also consistently messaged to our audience. The best way to do that is to have consistent imagery as well. That also plays in with fonts. Ideally, we want to set our brand fonts nice and early, regardless of what they are, because that consistency is going to help continue to build that messaging with our audience. And also putting in there an imagery example. So what would your typical content on social begin to look like? Are you going to use lifestyle images, or are you going to use more graphics and icons, or are you going to use animations? So understanding and getting a good snapshot about what your brand is going to look like on social is absolutely key. Now, this is key to set down, like I said, to build consistency, but also then, if you are going to be working with any outsourced providers, there's nothing worse than saying, hey, listen, we'd love it if you can create some content for us, some images, blah, 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 for Instagram, Facebook, and so on and so forth. And they come back and it's like, well, that is so not on brand. And that's what this brand identity canvas does, and why it is such an integral part from a strategic point of view, to make sure you are creating that thumb-stopping content. Gia, you've jumped in. Will there be a recording of the one? Absolutely, we will be sharing a recording. Please don't leave me now, though. We'll be sharing a link to a recording, which will be available for a period of time, so you can listen to my voice over and over again. Once we've got an idea about that brand canvas, this is such an important slide, because this comes back to not just understanding our objectives and how we're going about social media marketing, but this is where we add value to our audience. Now, quite often people say, oh, make sure you're adding value on social media, but they don't actually define what that is. And anyone who's joined one of our webinars before, this is exactly what we want to do. We want to make sure that effectively we put a lens over it to what value is our content adding to our audience. And by that, we mean the content purpose. So we want to make sure that with any content we share on social media, not just imagery, but that we're either educating, entertaining, or inspiring our audience. That's what we mean by adding value. Educate them, tell them something new, tell them something that they didn't know, showcase your expertise, your organization's expertise, and give them something for free. That will help you position yourself as an expert. And obviously a weird old term that we used to use called trusted advisor. Entertain your audience as well. It includes some sorts of insights, commentary, thought-provoking content. Quite often we call it the entertainment content just a conversation starter. Absolutely, if you can use humor, that is always a great tool to penetrate the eyeballs in social media feeds, but entertaining our audience. And inspiring. Inspiring is where we do that storytelling that we love to do on social. Share stories of your customers and their success, not necessarily going, hey, look how amazing we were at helping these individuals, but share their incredible stories so that they can help, so you can help inspire your end users, your customers, etc. And the last bucket is persuade. And that's, that's where we talk about ourselves a bit more. It could be customer testimonials, unique selling points, all that sort of stuff. But we want to make sure that regardless of what we're doing, what we're publishing on social, it ticks at least one of these boxes. You can absolutely have content that educates, entertains, and inspires, but you want to make sure it's doing at least one of those, because otherwise I'm asking you, what are you sharing on social? So understand that content purpose. Unfortunately, we won't be making these slides available, but the recording will be. So some examples: entertainment and education. So one on the right there, educate, is spruiking a webinar, which obviously is driving people through to a richer piece of engagement, entertainment content. And there on the left, we've got our entertainment side of things, where when your computer starts for auto repairs, and just having a little bit of a jive about what our audience might always be feeling, with a little bit of a humorous twist on it. The inspirational quote, a lot of not-for-profits are great at having really striking visuals that do inspire their audience. And then obviously having that persuading content that really does push people to talk a little bit more about your product or service. Like we said, the persuade content is more around the sell. However, you do want to make sure you're adding value by educating, entertaining, and inspiring your audience before, building that brand recognition and that brand salience before you start obviously flogging your products or services. So now that we've thought about our brand canvas, making sure we're nice and consistent from the imagery side of things, and understanding what we're going to be providing by way of value, how do we start going about actually creating some of this thumb-stopping content? Well, first, one of the very valuable things to do is sparking some level of an emotional reaction. The best way to do that is understanding your audience very well, but it can be positive, such as happiness, laughter, inspiration, motivation, wonder, or surprise, but it can also be negative, such as fear or anger, or even disgust. Those sorts of really key parts in your images will elicit that emotional reaction and encourage people to stop as they are scrolling through your newsfeed. So think about those sorts of elements. As you can see there, Greenpeace, really stark imagery that really would cut through a newsfeed. One thing, and I'll come back to the middle example there from Greenpeace, is something that does really well is it creates this concept of juxtaposition, comparing two things, which once again can be a really powerful way to stop people scrolling, but also encourage them to engage. Listen, I did say I was going to say a lot. Consistency is really, really important. I'm going to post a link into the chat a little bit later in regards to a Gary V video. But consistency is so important when it comes to not just your goals and getting value out of social media, but also building that visibility, because that consistency will allow people to begin to see and have your content popping out. And so this idea that, it's not about going viral. Going viral is a flash in the pan. Yes, it might give you a little bit of a boost up for a short period of time. What you want to do is consistently build relationships with your audience and take them through from being someone who might have just seen your social content to beginning to really engage heavily, gain value from it, and then ultimately take the action, whether that's buy your product, subscribe to your service, or whatever the case may be. I could tell you a lot of stories about when clients have asked me, we need to make a video that goes viral. And that is absolutely not the case. What you need to do is create content that entertains, educates, and inspires your particular audience on a consistent basis. So guys, we won't be providing the deck, but there will be a link to the recording. So now that we've got a little bit of an idea about the strategy, we understand our purpose, etc., we want to then begin to think about how we can actually source and start creating these incredible images. Jeff Bullis, who is, he's actually probably more known for being an incredible content writer in Australia. But one thing that he says is imagery is in content marketing is a must if marketers want to make a lasting impression on consumers. And that's coming from someone who really does, like I mentioned, focus on a lot of lengthy content written. And so regardless of whether he's writing blogs, whether he's writing really in-depth pieces, he still makes sure that whether it's the tweet that's going out, that's driving the traffic, or even the blog itself, that visuals are really a key component to connecting with the audience and making sure they stay and engage. With this in mind, he believes that marketers should focus on creating visual content over text and audio. And in doing so, the likelihood of being cutting through on those social media feeds. We absolutely have seen a rise in video content. We have seen even a rise in audio content over the last little while. But the fact remains that you won't get earballs and you won't get people watching your video content if it isn't visually inspiring. So how do we do that? Well, talking first and foremost around using an example from Instagram, but you want to make sure you've got a very consistent theme. Obviously, this will leverage off your brand canvas, but that consistency will allow people to obviously, like I said, connect in with your brand in a more consistent, more aware way. Now, that doesn't mean you have to post the exact same things and you have to post the exact same style with particular quotes or that sort of side of things, but making sure you're consistent in colors, making sure you're consistent in fonts. And even if you are going to be providing content with text overlays, etc., even putting those in consistent locations so that you train your audience to take away those key messages. I'll skip over this one quickly because we did talk about the color palette. Like we said, consider a few of you already shared your favorite content accounts on Instagram. Consider the fact that as you scroll through your, let's just say 70 meters of Instagram a day, when you're scrolling through, you'll be able to identify that post from that particular creator. And quite often, whether that's a particular style of imagery, in more cases than not, it's also that color palette that they use. That ability to pop out of the newsfeed. A lot of brands will also look at ways that they can not just compete with similar organizations, but also just create content that sort of, I won't say jars, that's probably the wrong way, but really pops out when it comes to the native feel of the platform as well. Quite often, in the earlier days of Facebook, we saw a lot of brands using what we call warm colors, like darker oranges and even reds, because it contrasted against the user experience of Facebook, because Facebook was very blue, simply blue and white, and just popped out. The one on the right is stunning, absolutely, yeah, and very stark. And that's one of the things is how, and we'll talk about even some of the imagery context in a moment, but making sure that it really does, you do build that consistent color palette as well. So here's an interesting one, high quality imagery. Now I'm going to put a bit of an asterisk to this in 2 moments as well, but what we want to make sure is that we do have good quality visuals. It really is, it's fascinating about how much Instagram really raised the bar of visual creatives on social media. When brands first started really using Instagram for marketing in Australia in about 2015, the caliber of imagery content on Facebook from brands in Australia, both big and small, was pretty shocking. But along came Instagram, which was originally a photographer's platform. And so obviously photographers were sharing their amazing images that they caught on these incredibly powerful DSLR cameras. And to stand out on Instagram, brands all of a sudden had to go and start creating really high quality images. They couldn't get away with some of the text updates they're putting on Facebook and some of the really average sort of content that was being shared. And it really raised the bar. To that point, consider how you're going to go about getting that content. Are you going to engage a photographer? Are you going to bring them in on a regular basis, or how are you going to be doing that? One thing we always encourage is batch production of your content. So if you are going to bring in a photographer to do maybe some product shots or maybe some lifestyle images for you, then also while they're in there, make sure that they get a huge breadth of content. Don't just get 1 or 2 photos, get photos from absolutely every angle that you can see it out over a longer period of time. Now, I did mention I was going to put a bit of an asterisk to this, and absolutely high quality content is so valuable. However, we are seeing a wee bit of a trend when it comes to what we call lo-fi content, which low fidelity. Basically what that is a bit more of your rough and rugged content. Now, the reason we've seen that begin to provide a bit of value to brands is because a lot of consumers, a lot of people, our end users, they know that we're using social media platforms to market to them. And so as a result, they are getting very savvy at sort of ignoring some marketing messages. And some of those more raw, more authentic forms of imagery content can really jump out amongst what is sometimes very highly doctored imagery. And that's why platforms like Instagram stories, well, obviously coming from Snapchat, and TikTok have become really quite powerful, because the content shared on those platforms is very authentic. It feels like those brands are a part of their community, because it isn't that overly polished imagery. So not to say you have to go either way, but absolutely experiment, see which way your audience really does try to consume your content. I always love to bring out an example that years ago, and there was an ad which I stopped in my news feed dozens of times, and it was for an MBA. And the image that was used, it wasn't one of those polished stock images of someone in a lecture theatre standing in front and talking to their professor, or any of that sort of. What it was a really lo-fi image of a girl that was graduating. And each and every time I went to scroll through my feed, I stopped on that, because I automatically thought, oh, which one of my friends on Facebook has graduated? Because I had a picture of her boyfriend, and her parents. And because it was such an authentic picture, each and every time I'm just like, oh, which one of my friends has graduated? And it got me each and every time. And so consider that. Yes, absolutely high quality imagery is important, but also see if, maybe there is a mix there. Maybe there is an opportunity, whether it's newsfeed content or whether it's stories as well. Now, if you don't have access to, say, an amazing photographer, or budget can be a challenge, there are plenty of royalty-free stock image sites out there. Pixabay, Unsplash, Pexels, 3 are my favorites. The one thing I'd say is a lot of the content here does get used fairly regularly, because it is free. So look at different ways you can spruce that up, whether it's cropping those images or text over the top to really transform it. But it does provide you with a bit of value. There are free and paid versions. There have been times where absolutely for different campaigns, we've had to dip into our pocket to get some of the higher quality paid content, paid stock imagery. But absolutely, if you don't have access to a photographer, then these tools can be a great way to sort of supplement what you've got. Now, whilst I've talked about DSLRs, and yes, it is really, like I said, getting high quality imagery is such an important element. One thing that's come around is that the cameras on smartphones these days are the equivalent to a DSLR of about 2 to 3 years ago. So the sensor that's in most smartphones these days is really, really high quality. So you can absolutely get away with taking images yourself using a smartphone. However, that doesn't mean that you can just go out there and start taking snaps and expect to get the same quality of imagery. So if you are going to be doing a little bit of DIY photography, whether that is with a smartphone or whether it is with a proper camera, you do need to begin to upskill yourself. We'll talk about some of the tactics in a moment. But you need to think about ways to make sure that you grab that audience attention. Now, one of the best ways and one of the easiest ways, just from a simple composition point of view, is understanding what they call the rule of 3 in photography. And what that is quite often, we typically don't want to have, whether it's our product, whether it's our CEO, or whether it's ourselves, dead in the middle of the image. It's actually quite confronting. And so what we typically try to do is we try to line up our focal point of the image on one of the tri lines. So as an example, with this image, we'd actually be looking to try to position it a bit more to the right of the focal point. Consider whether or not you're going to be having it left or right centered, whatever the case may be. But as you can see here, this is a much better image than the previous two. What it's done is taken the same image, but we've now cropped it or angled it in a certain way that's going to pop out in the news feed, rather than just having a smartphone right dead in the center of it. Once again, there's also quite a few tools on modern smartphones, such as, what do they call it? Portrait mode, I think. I don't use an iOS device, so I always struggle with what that terminology, but portrait mode, which allows you to create, and even 3D images, which do allow you to create much more thumb-stopping content. But it is important to understand that composition plays a really big part as to whether people are scrolling through. If you are going to be using DIY photography as well, like I mentioned, begin to think about any sort of hardware you might need to begin to upgrade to. Smartphones are great, but you might need things such as additional lenses that actually clock onto your smartphone, things like tripods or anything like that, because there's nothing worse than having grainy or blurry images, because that will not only mean that the image quality is pretty poor, but even when you begin to crop it and do different things with it, you're going to be at a loss. So consider the composition of your images. When it comes to a couple of tips to make sure that you're capturing great content, first and foremost, consider lighting. That is such a key element, whether it's video or imagery, but having quality lighting. Nothing beats the value of outdoor lighting. It is so much brighter, etc. But obviously, if we are taking photos indoors, that can be quite challenging. But do consider supplementing that lighting, whether halo lights are valuable, but probably not the best, but we do want to make sure that the visibility of our images is really key. Consider things like angles as well. So to maintain interest and diversify your feed, for example, try shooting the subject or your scene from a lower angle rather than straight on. Create different emotions and thoughts with the different angles. This is also where things like lay flats, which we've got down there, became very, very popular on a platform like Instagram. It was a very unique angle. We hadn't seen, our brunch and our food from a lay flat angle. So lay flat is when it's laid flat on a table and shot from above. And that was a very unique angle, and that created some that really did begin to scythe through the clutter that was on Instagram. It's become a little bit more commonplace, so you can absolutely still use it, but that's where trying different angles will still help you get a little bit of cut through. Depth and background, so understanding what your focal point is, whether you're going to blur out the background and those side of things. And white space is just where you effectively, you don't want to not a literal wash of white, so we don't want to just start smearing white colors on it. But what that is creating open areas between the design and elements. So this might be taking a step back and getting a little bit more content into your imagery when you take when you actually capture it. But also if you are putting text overlay. So if you are going to put text on your images as well, you don't want it to be too busy. You want to make sure that there is gaps and spaces between the different elements in your images. I'd absolutely encourage you to use a tool like burst mode if you are using a smartphone. Burst mode is fairly common on a lot of smartphones these days. And what that will do, it will actually take multiple pictures in one go. And what that means is, heaven forbid you're your model or whoever it is that you're using closes their eyes, or there's a bit of cloud that goes over at the top, whatever the case is, it gives you multiple images you can then go and select the best one from. When it comes to some of these, we always say show, don't tell. And by that, I mean, trying to take that contrived element out of our content. Instead of having people, standing there and pointing to a whiteboard as an example, actually capturing them in the moment as they're conversing, etc. So trying to, as part of that content capture, encourage that sort of normality. That creates much more authentic content. And that's why that sort of lo-fi content has begun to come part and parcel. And even blur and grain, like, believe it or not, but imperfection can make photos a whole lot more interesting. You can invoke things like, vintage feels and that sort of side of things. So experiment with different styles, both when you're capturing the content, but then also when you're looking to edit it. So a couple of quick tips, like I mentioned, we want to make sure that we're not only ready to share great images, but we want to do it in the best way possible. So a couple of different ideas, like I said, using those high quality images, but don't be afraid to go down the route of lo-fi. Ensure your image really conveys your message without the text as well. Yep, text overlays can be valuable, but like I said, whatever your focal point is, whether it is your product, your service, or even a key part of the message of your imagery, try to align that with one of those lines in the thirds. Really know your target audience. And part of that as well, can do a little bit of a stalk. Have a look at some of your Instagram followers and do a little bit of a cheeky stalk and see what sort of accounts they're following. Have a look at the sort of content that they might be consuming and make sure that A, you're not completely off kilter, but also B, you can begin to stand out within that noise. Evoke that emotional reaction, finding ways to do that. A big part of that is human faces. Believe it or not, that is what, there are three really key things that really grab people's attention when it comes to elements. And that is, one of those is eyes. Having eyes in a post really does grab people's attention, and using things like facial expressions, etc., can help, really invoke that emotional reaction. Also optimize your images for search using alt tags. So when you're actually publishing it, making sure you've got alt tags in there, because that will help its discoverability. Don't be afraid to jazz up your images, things like text overlays and filters. I wouldn't necessarily be going the whole hog on some of the Instagram filters, but look at ones that might actually provide a little bit more consistency, but also ones that, will pop out in the newsfeed. One of the notes we have is, use eye-catching colors, but a big part of that is obviously sticking to your brand canvas. But ensure you use images that really reflect your brand identity and add value, as we discussed. And I didn't even realize I've got all these here right next to us. There we go. I could have ticked on through these. Like I said, include people, tell a story as well. Like we mentioned, tell a story both with your imagery, but don't be afraid to include that in the copy as well. One thing that really does get favored by the algorithms when it comes to that engagement is what they call dwell time. And the more intriguing and evoking that your imagery is, and then coupled with a great caption, increases that time that people spend with our posts. And we've got one down the bottom there, take risks. By that, we don't want to be completely ripping up, like we said, absolutely stay on strategy. But the first person that probably took a lay flat image, there would have been people sitting around going, what are you doing? People don't see their brunch, people don't see their products from that angle. They're not going to recognize it. So the first person that took a lay flat image was absolutely taking a risk, but they created content that really did, well, it now became an absolute, almost a trend and a must. I don't know a cafe that I follow on Instagram that doesn't use the old lay flat. So take risks, see if there's different ways that you can frame and use your content. Now, if you are going to be using photographers, obviously, if you've got an internal photographer, well, congratulations, happy days, that's awesome. Otherwise, if you are going to be outsourcing, look at different ways that you can find photographers that will be able to help you create great content for your social. There's quite a few freelance programs, freelance platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, and Freelancer, and these can help supplement the skills and the resources that you have internally. If you are not an avid photographer, then and if you haven't got a few ideas around the principles of it, and when you take the content, it looks crap, you've got two options: either upskill yourself or outsource it. And here are a couple of examples of some of those platforms. That being said, treat it like a job interview. Have a look through past works, etc. Consider how their soft skills are, their communication with you, and their understanding of a brief. But do consider freelancing if your capabilities do not sit there, and even maybe if it's a time-based situation. So what my suggestions for creating visual content for services. So for a service, I think one of the biggest challenges with services is that show don't tell. Trying to get content in as it happens. The problem otherwise is that you're going to be overly reliant on very stock imagery, which won't pop out as much. And so find ways to be able to tell what you do when it comes to your service. That can be obviously a little bit more challenging from a digital point of view, but we'll talk about some animated ones in a moment as well. I mentioned earlier, virality is probably not the dragon that we try to chase when it comes to good content. A much more attainable concept is understanding shareable images, what content people would want to share. A lot of that comes from understanding our audience and then thinking about adding value, which was that purpose. Understanding content that for our particular audience, what would educate, entertain, or inspire them. So a couple of tips and ideas that you can begin to think of and mull over. Solve a problem. Understand what your audience's biggest pain points are when it comes to your product or service. They could be tips, tricks, shortcuts, hacks, how-tos, fun facts, and quotes. Think about how you can solve their problem. Original content is really important. The main reason being that even Instagram has come out recently and said that on their platform, they are going to be favoring original content. And I dare say a big part of that is things like reposting and sharing of memes and that sort of stuff is going to rank lower. And so, yes, absolutely, curating content can be a really valuable part of our mix, but it is simple and inexpensive. However, users do love original content, original created content, and so one of the best ways to do that is obviously leveraging back on what that purpose is, but batch produce it. Produce content. If you are going to be doing tips and tricks or whatever the case may be, write down a list of as many different ideas you can come up with and create them en masse, because what that will allow you to do is be consistent, but also if you get to Tuesday and you don't have a post, instead of just sharing something from a meme account or something like that, you've got a good understanding of what will resonate with your audience. I always say that one of the biggest things that we can have in our trick bag of social media marketing is the idea to be able to repurpose properly. Now, what I mean by that is looking at existing content that we've got that we can rejuvenate, revitalize, and reuse. So first and foremost, we want to optimize images for each platform. So yes, absolutely, with different scheduling tools, we can shoot those images out over Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram with the click of a button. However, you do want to make sure that it does work on each one of those platforms. Doesn't need to be cropped slightly. You want to absolutely, in most cases, want to vary the captions. And you might also absolutely want to be scheduling those at different times, because your audience on these different platforms might be active at different stages as well. But repurpose your content. And by that as well, if you have existing content, such as maybe you've got video content, maybe you've got an infographic, maybe you've got a white paper, is there content that is in there that you can reframe, resize, and share on different platforms? That's why quite often we think about creating what we call pillar content. Recording creating something, one large piece of content that we can then dice up and then seed out over these channels over a longer period of time. And of course, one thing that's really, this comes back to the strategy side of things. We're not on social to get just the likes, right? It is a big part of it, but what we want to do is we want to make sure our audience is, we're taking them from being a social media viewer to a customer, or whatever our end outcome is, getting away from just simply sharing cat memes and stuff that's going to grow our audience, to grow our audience in a relevant way. So absolutely, engagement equals more reach. The algorithms, when they get, when people like and comment on our content, that tells Facebook, Instagram that this content is high value, and typically we get more organic reach. It also means they're more likely to see that content the next time you publish content. So engagement is really important, which is why we talk about some of those really key visual elements. But you do want to have a clear call to action in your content. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be explicitly said with text. It can be implied, but you want to make sure when you're sharing this content, what is your purpose? Educate, entertain, inspire, or you want to actually push people to take an action and you want to encourage them to buy your product, but making sure you understand that before you publish that, and make sure that whether it's in the caption and the content, that you are driving people towards that direct call to action. Now let's sort of talk about the editing side of things. A lot of particularly video, but definitely with images, you can absolutely change the value, the focal point, and as a result, the success of your content with amazing editing skills and apps. So let's have a chat about a couple of things. First and foremost, I dare say we've all had this. You know, you spent over an hour trying to edit or update or change a feature, and you've accidentally deleted it or lost the updates. That's one thing I'd always encourage is either, if you are a vigilant saver, happy days, good luck to you. If you're not, tools that are cloud-based typically save as you go. So some of the Adobe Suite, some of the things, tools like Canva will actually save your edits as you go, which is really, really valuable to make sure you aren't going to lose any of the hard work you've put in. But image enhancement can take a photo from drab to fab to leverage on a very, very old and well-trodden terminology. A quick example here, original image on the right, and then one that's been enhanced on, original image on the left, and one that's been enhanced using software on the right. Now, whilst this will also depend on, I guess, your comfort, your skill, and even your budget when it comes to editing software, in a lot of cases, some quick edits and a little bit of time spent on enhancing our images is going to result in really valuable increases in naturally engagement and visibility, but then also the outcome we're trying to get from our social media content. I won't go through all these merely because we just don't have time, but there are a huge amount of different editing tools out there to really spruce up your content and really make sure that it doesn't get lost and it does grab those eyeballs in the newsfeed. To be honest, I'll cover off a couple quickly. Snapseed used to be probably one of the better ones. It's a free app. Well, it was free on Android. I think it was $1 on Apple for some strange reason, and that allowed you to really edit quite a few elements on an image directly from your smartphone. Personally, now I think a lot of those features have actually been rolled into Canva. I don't have shares in Canva, so I wish I did. I really do. I do spruik Canva a lot, mainly because the paid version of it has a huge amount of additional editing features and stock images as well. It's absolutely. I'm glad that someone's kicking there. It's a several billion-dollar company. I couldn't leave that one out. I do actually really enjoy using Canva for editing both images and videos these days, for mainly some of those quick fixes. Like I said, you can adjust things like color, brightness, saturation, and quite a few other things as well. That being said, there are tools like if you look at what we've got here on screen, what we call a cinematograph. That's where it's an image that sort of has one or two elements that move. They create really eye-catching content. Because what it does, it actually tricks your brain slightly, because it makes you go, what's wrong with this? Because there's only one thing that's moving. Is it fake? Is it real? Whatever the case is. And so Flixel and Ripple are two tools that allow you to create these sort of cinemagraphs, which, as you can see, I think I got another example just here, which really jump out in the newsfeed. For those of you who are going to go right down the rabbit hole, probably the best tools are still the Adobe Suite. Photoshop allows you to do so much more than most other platforms. It does take a little bit more technical skills, and it does come with a bit more of a cost. So it really does. It is determined based on what your outcomes are and what content you need to produce to really engage your audience. But what we call etched photos, which is where you cut someone out and put it on a different background, or we then put our brand colors behind it as a block image. A lot of that happens in Photoshop, and it is a much more powerful tool. But like I said, it is a bit more technical and does come with a cost. But once again, It's about understanding what skills you have in-house, what content you need to engage your audience, and then going, great, well then do we capture the content ourselves and then give a simple design brief to a digital producer or whatever the case may be. And so one of the reasons, team, I didn't put it on a separate slide, Canva is just red hot. It is a fantastic tool. The mobile app as well, it used to be really shocking, the mobile app, and they've, I think about maybe 18 months ago, they upped it, and it is now, it's not as good as the desktop look and feel, but it is pretty amazing, some of the things you can do on the fly. That being said, a lot of smartphones do have imagery editing software as well, so I will tip the hat to that. But Canva, the paid version, allows you to upload your own colors, so using your hex values, having your brand colors in there, your brand fonts, all those sorts of things will allow us to stay consistent to what we talked about earlier in that brand canvas. So $17 a month, and allows you to make sure that these edits you can make on batch really quickly and consistently. It also does Canva purchased, I want to say, Pixabay and Pexels, so two of those free imagery websites we talked about earlier. And so they now have a huge library of imagery content already in the platform that you can pull into your content with a click of a button. Now, Canva is a free tool as well. It does have slightly limited, it doesn't have some of the features that I just mentioned, but for a free tool, it has incredibly powerful applications. The one thing, it still does have a lot of free stock imagery content in there, but some of the better images are only available for paid. However, you can obviously upload your own images or even source them from some of those other sites as well. Not just for our imagery content, but Canva has a huge array of different tools and templates. And even if you are pretty, let's just say, novice when it comes to layering, creating layering with those images to make them pop out, or even when you're thinking about, how do I create a text overlay that really looks great? They have amazing templates in there that can help you become an amazing, an amazing photo editor. That being said, that's why it can be really powerful to then also begin to set up some templates for yourself. Make sure you are maintaining that consistency across your imagery. They also have quite a few, sort of e-learning tools on there as well in Canva's design school. Really awesome. I'd absolutely, if you're looking at upskilling yourself, I'd absolutely encourage you to check out the design school, because a couple of different tips and tricks to make your images even more bold. And not just images as well. If you are someone who is responsible for other forms of marketing collateral, there's some great stuff in there. I will just very quickly talk about two other apps that we consider to be really quite powerful by way of helping spruce up images and making it a little bit more rough, a little bit more eye-catching. I think it's pronounced Vesco. I've never actually heard anyone say it, but it's a third-party app. The app offers a subscription to access a full range of filters. You can upload your photos, select filters, as well as do a lot of cropping, editing, all those sorts of things very, very rapidly. A lot of those pre-made filters also allow you to, at the touch of a button, take something from, maybe low lighting to highlighting and those sorts of things. So allow you to really tweak it. And very similar with Lightroom. Don't know if anyone has come across Lightroom. It's an Adobe application that's, there is actually a free mobile version of it as well. A lot of influencers use this platform to edit their photos and apply a particular preset. So if you're looking for a specific tone or color theme for your images, it's an app that allows you to jump in there and do some very, very quick edits on the fly. Once again, we talk about thumb stopping being, and we predominantly sort of mention things around the news feed, but absolutely when you're creating your story content as well in vertical form, you still want to make sure that is still eye-catching as well. There we go. So Lindy, look, we've got two hands up, I think, for Lightroom there, and the color adjustment as well. Like we said, you absolutely want to make sure that lighting, where possible, you capture the content in its best form. So using natural lighting or supplementing that in some way. You can tweak it after the fact, however, it never quite looks the same. But if you've got darker images and that's just what's come out in the chopping floor, then still take that time to adjust that color so it does pop out in people's newsfeed. One thing I do want to also make very, very clear is ensuring that your images are fit for the right site. Now, Canva is great for this because Canva does have a lot of these preset sizes in there. But you want to make sure that your images are always cropped to the best ratios for the particular platform you're sharing. Typically, so Facebook is quite good in the fact it's very dynamic. It'll actually adjust the, I guess, the frame around the posts in a very dramatic way, and allows you to be really consistent in how images look on the platform. However, generally now, particularly for ads, but even for newsfeed content, 1080 by 1080, so that sort of square image is actually the best practice recommendation when it comes to images for Facebook. However, you can also trial their longer images, so 1080 by 1350. So that actually takes up a little bit more real estate on the newsfeed for both Facebook and Instagram. So whichever way you begin to go, I always encourage you to trial out different formats and styles. But you absolutely want to make sure that the ratio is relevant for that particular platform. For example, if you are trying 4:5 to use on Facebook, I would still not be using that for LinkedIn because it's going to crop it in an inappropriate way. So understanding what the best ratios are for different platforms. This does bring me to a very interesting point in the fact that Instagram has been trialing a full vertical feed. So because of the success of TikTok, obviously, Instagram now has Reels. They're looking at, and they've been trialing full vertical news feeds. So even the news feed that we're used to scrolling through with those square images, etc., they're looking at trialing that as full vertical, which is making square images and their copy and text and everything like that look a little bit funhouse. So watch this space. It's being trialed on some users at the moment, but it does seem that Instagram is very, very focused on vertical video. Sorry, vertical feeds. So that also includes images. So a lot of that sort of vertical imagery that we might be using on Facebook or Instagram stories is probably going to be a format that we're going to have to consider when it comes to Instagram's newsfeed moving forward. So keep an eye on that space. It is going to be a very interesting development and change a lot when it comes to how we approach imagery content for social. So keep an eye out for that. We've got here, you can outsource presets and upload to Lightroom for absolutely, yeah. So once again, whether it's templates or presets and those sorts of things, you can absolutely use skill sets outside your organization, pay them for that one job, and then have access to that to build that consistency over a long period of time. So Tim, I'd love to hear from you before we kick into the next part of the masterclass. What imagery editing software or apps are you currently using and why? If you don't use any softwares yet, I encourage you to pick one of the ones that we've discussed, particularly one of the free ones. For those of you who are using one, I'd love to hear from you. What is it good? Is it bad? What is it you love about it or dislike about it? And which one are you using? So just jump into the chat team. So are you using any imagery editing software at the moment? Lindy, as a graphic designer, full subscription with Creative Cloud. Oh my God, that went very quickly. All right, let me just scroll back up. You guys all just bombarded that at one time. I love it. Cool. Lindy, absolutely. So the Creative Cloud, no brainer for you. Absolutely. I do think that, that is still the gold standard of imagery creative, but it does take a little bit of time to upskill in them. We've got quite a few for Canva. Kara's on both. There we go. When using Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom, love that. Awesome, Emma. Yep, absolutely. Smartphones, God, they've come so far. I still have a photo that I took in high school of a Motorola V70, and it was an awfully grainy photo of me and my mate wrestling. And I still go back to that because I think it's quite a funny image from yesteryear. Photopea, that sounds interesting. So feel free to, it's like Photoshop but free. Awesome. Canva and Lightroom seems to be the go. Maxine, which filters do you use for videos? I actually, previously I've not. I've with some of the brands I'm working at the moment, we're really trying that sort of lo-fi side of things, so a little bit more rough and rugged. So I don't really have one to suggest there, but if anyone else does, feel free to jump in there. Wendy, using Adobe GIMP, haven't heard of that one, Ken. There we go. Always good to hear a new one. Ibis Paint. So there's quite a few. A lot of variation here. There we go. And even a couple of you jumping in around your video editing tools as well. There we go. Yeah, absolutely. Things like Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro are pretty solid for video. Once again, probably the upper echelon of those standards, but it really depends on what type of video content you're using and how much you're willing to invest in that as well. Awesome. Thanks for jumping in there, team. Love that one. So I just wanted to very quickly talk about a little bit of a case study before we dive into the final parts of today's masterclass conversation. A little bit of I guess a case study from them. They are a virtual receptionist provider for small businesses and startups. They have receptionist teams that sort of work remotely, so we're possibly familiar with that sort of VA side of things. Basically, they started using Canva to support their marketing and content strategies. Were pretty rough and raw when they first did it, but after converting and beginning to use a consistent theme and beginning to use consistent imagery for their audience, it was data, it was stats, it was imagery like this. They actually saw a 10x increase in the engagement they got on Instagram and a 9x increase on Facebook, and they attribute that almost entirely to the shift to better content they were creating with Canva. Now, once again, I don't think you need to be anchored to a particular tool, but beginning to create much higher content for them, a 10x increase in engagement. Obviously, that has a knock-on effect to the organic reach they get, plus also the audience they begin to build off the back of that. So such an important thing to begin to contemplate is how you can take your content to the next level. So finally, team, just want to touch, we've typically been talking about like newsfeed content so far, but also want to discuss thumbnails, GIFs, and infographics, because these are other forms of imagery content that's so vital to get right on particular networks and platforms. I think the thumbnail is one of the probably misunderstood or poorly utilized features of YouTube. A thumbnail on YouTube is such an important part of posting videos and publishing content to the platform. When someone searches for a particular video, one of the biggest things is that YouTube is a search engine. YouTube is the second largest search engine behind Google. And when people are searching for content, when the results appear, then the first thing you'll see is someone's thumbnail. Now, if you haven't selected it, it's just taken as a random image from somewhere in that video. What you want to utilize in the same way that we've talked about so far is you want to customize your thumbnails and make sure they are eye-catching and also consistent. So one thing, when it comes to your thumbnail is probably one of the biggest parts that actually generates clicks to your YouTube content. Like I said, when someone's searched for key terms around your video, or even in that right-hand pane of suggested video content, the thumbnail is the first thing they're going to see. So that's what's going to encourage them to click on and see the value of your video content. So think about how you can make sure that with different variations, but how you can encourage people that are looking for particular types of content are actually driving through and effectively then viewing your content. So what I want you to do is pick a topic of interest to you. Maybe it's something around your particular organization. Maybe there's some keywords you think your audience would be searching for. Maybe it's how to change a spark plug, or how do I create a social media strategy. What I want you to do is very quickly jump onto YouTube, just have a quick search and look at those thumbnails. They're effectively going to be the competition that you would be facing if you were sharing content on YouTube. So I want you to look at those thumbnail images. Are there ones that particularly draw your attention? Are there ones that pop out at you? How can you incorporate some of those things that you feel are very impactful into your own thumbnails? So spend a couple of quick seconds on that, team. Jump onto YouTube, put in a search string that you think is interesting to you. In this case, let's keep it on brand. Let's keep it within something you feel like your customers might be searching for. And basically, the results that are going to pop up are the competition you would face. When you are sharing content on YouTube, that is the competition you'd be facing on to get those clicks. As I mentioned, you want to make sure they are that you are creating thumbnails that are consistent, not just with your brand canvas, but even consistent in the style of imagery that you might be using on Facebook and Instagram. The reason for that is that consistency. There's that old adage, we need people to see our brand or our message or our product at least 7 times before they do anything with it. It's now probably around 27 is let's call them conservative estimations. So if you have people that are following you on different platforms, you absolutely want to make sure that your content jumps out to them if they are, say, searching for you, content on other platforms as well. So have a little bit of a search, see how you'd be competing. Alrighty, team. One thing as well, when it comes to YouTube as well, when you are creating those thumbnails, you might want to even theme, because YouTube, very big, is the value of playlists. So how you create playlists on the platform. You might even make sure there's some consistency in the thumbnails and approaches between those different playlists as well. Have a look at some of the creators that you might follow on that platform, or some of the really big content creators. Have a look at the way that they create their thumbnails and how they speak about the value of that video content. Awesome, team. I'll begin to push on where I'm getting a little bit close to the end of the time, and I don't want to eat up too much of your afternoon. GIFs can also still be a phenomenal way of engaging visually with your audience. Whether that is posting them, or even just using GIFs from a community management point of view. One of the great things is, and you don't necessarily need to create these yourself, but when it comes to responding, Giphy and a few of those other GIF platforms are actually embedded into a lot of these social media networks now, so you can actually respond using GIFs. If you do want to create your GIFs, so for those of you who haven't come across them before, they're effectively very short, rolling, and low resolution is the best way to describe them, images that actually play on a loop, as you saw in the previous example. Now, you can absolutely create your own GIFs. You can create them via a variety of different tools. You can use something like Canva, even WhatsApp, when you're sharing video content between users. If it's short enough, you can actually share it as a GIF. So consider, once again, going back to purpose, going back to our audience, making sure that that short, sharp GIF is actually still relaying that message that you want it to. But like I said, a variety of different tools. A lot of smartphones even have GIF creators in there where you can take existing video content and you can then loop it. Otherwise, there's a variety of different platforms around. Like I said, add to that list Canva, and also even WhatsApp can even compress and allow you to share GIFs. And finally, team, I wanted to chat about infographics. Infographics are seeing a great resurgence, not necessarily just in the format that we've got here in these visuals, but also seeing a resurgence based on the fact that we know, like I mentioned, dwell times, the amount of time spent on posts, impacts that algorithmic goodness, and how platforms like Facebook and Instagram consider the value of our content. But effectively, Instagrams are a much richer form of imagery content. Quite often, they're a visual representation of data or information or process, and really quite shareable on social media. Pardon me. You can use tools like Canva, Pictochart, Venage, I can't remember exactly how to spell it, but it's VENNAGE. And these tools can help you create these really visually appealing, but also insightful pieces of content. Once again, similar strategy first. Find your content, think about what sort of data or story or copy you want to actually begin to articulate to your audience, and make sure it's consistent with your other themes. Once again, as an example here on the right, we've got those sorts of animations, animated styles of graphics. Are you going to be using more lifestyle image, or are you actually going to be using different canned sort of photography? So when you are producing your infographics, make sure that they do have a clear and consistent theme and message that people are trying to consume in them. One great thing about infographics as well is the way that people are beginning to use them on, say, platforms like Instagram. So quite often we think about infographics being these large, A4 often sort of sized images, but we're seeing a lot more brands using, oh, there we go. Bingo. Jess, you jumped to it straight away. Are actually using carousels on Instagram as a form of infographic. So take the one on the right there. They may have the fast food facts as the first image, and then scrolling through to each and every one of them. Once again, what this does, it builds a bigger relationship with your audience, more time on brand, but also that dwell time on the platform. So consider, once again, yep, absolutely, Gia can understand that some people might not be a fan of different styles, but it's about working out what works best with your audience and then adapting that. Like I said, infographics are great for disseminating really chunky bits of data, processes, or stories. And so when themed well, They are highly engaging, shareable, but one of the other things as well is that people are more likely to save this content, and saving is just another amazing indicator to the algorithm that content is highly valuable. And you've jumped in too early on me, because absolutely really good for repurposing, both repurposing up and repurposing down. So what I mean by that, say you've created this fast food facts one here on the right. Each one of those could absolutely also be an individual post at different stages. Organic reach isn't 100%. So that means that when you do publish it, doesn't mean that everyone's going to see it that first time. Not that you'd post one a day for 9 days, but you might seed that content out and reuse those images at different stages. Or if you go back and you realize, you know what, we've shared a lot of content on this particular topic, you know, maybe we could actually pull that back and actually create an infographic around that. So repurposing up and repurposing down. Gee, is Twitter good for posting images? I think with Twitter, there's a lot of text, like just copy-based images, copy-based tweets on Twitter. So absolutely, I think images are highly valuable, even if it's just the fact they take up more real estate as people are scrolling. So if you're also cheaper than using a photographer, absolutely there. You've never used it for marketing yet? Not a worry. And once again, I think one valuable thing is have a look at some of the other brands in your space, other similar organizations. Not just see if they are using infographics, but also have a look at see what type of their content is, you know, the best performing content, and same with yours, and go, could we actually repurpose this, or could we actually create more informative content in the form of an infographic? Awesome, team. So I'm gonna wrap up very quickly, because I have taken you guys over the 2 o'clock mark, but just a little bit of a checklist for you. Look at your feeds with new eyes. Follow amazing content producers. Follow similar organizations. And when you see an eye-catching design, stop and think, what have they done here that is great? Is it the lines? Is it the angles they've used? Is it the way they've created a text call out? Even just last week, ABC News came on. I really liked the title slide they used, and I went to Canva and I created that myself. Learn from photographers and designers. There are some great content creators who talk about really cool smartphone hacks, and there's some really, really unique content around there about, you know, how to take really, really different styles of images that will really pop out in people's newsfeed. So I'd really encourage you to follow brands, even follow brands like Canva and Adobe on social media platforms, because they often share really cool content. If you're a bit of a newbie, absolutely jump into the Canva Design School. And like I said, follow other brands with amazing imagery. Create an image or mood board for your organization. So obviously you've got that brand canvas, but you might also take that to the next level and start creating that mood board that shows different styles of images and ways about going about engaging your audience. Download, use, and getting out, start getting in. The best way to learn a tool is to play around with it, and also have a go at creating things like custom thumbnails, GIFs, and infographics. There's nothing wrong with trialing it, seeing how it performs for you. And I'd also encourage you, off the back of today's session, is to create a little bit of an action plan for yourself. So there's a variety of different things we might have said throughout today's masterclass. What I'd like you to do is think of 3 things that you can do in response to what you've learned today. So there might be particular elements that I've talked about. You're like, you know what, I really want to get going on that. Maybe it is the Canva Design School. Maybe it is you want to experiment with infographics, or you want to try with different angles and lines with your content. What I'd love you to do is jot down 3 different ideas that you're going to begin to put into place for your social media marketing or your own learning side of things, but also identify when are you going to do that. So what are the situations that are going to drive you to do that? Are you going to start the design school the next time your photographer sends you a bucket load of pictures or whatever it is? But set down that action plan with a couple of ideas you're going to put into place for your organization and your social media marketing efforts. Awesome, team. Thank you so much. It was a huge bit of content we've jumped through, talking about eye-grabbing content, talking about thumb-stopping content. I really hope you guys enjoyed the session. Absolutely connecting with us on different social media platforms. Feel free to connect in with me on LinkedIn as well. Really hope you enjoyed it, team. There's a couple of questions that popped in. Is it better to focus on 1 to 2? Absolutely. Always encourage, focus on 1 or 2 platforms, nail them, and then expand. Otherwise, well, it can be such a challenge. Fantastic. Melvin, you've shared your list of things. Awesome, team. Hope you had an amazing, Hope you really enjoyed this session for starters, and hope you have an amazing rest of your Friday and beyond that. Take care, and all the best, team.